Not continue.
When we talk about Robinhood taxes or financial transaction taxes, we're talking about imposing the tax on only one small part of what the finance sector actually does. We're saying that trading, that is, trading assets back and forth, should be taxed. If you are an investor and buy some stocks today and hold them for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you would pay a small fee going in and a small fee going out. But that would be trivial to you.
To tax every financial transaction, that has a single, nice, simple aim, a bit of redistribution. It doesn't kill the monster, but it does, every time you do one of your monstrous activities, no matter how tiny, you redistribute a bit.
Those transactions, because of the tax, will have to pay the tax, and so they won't be as profitable. You'll cut back on those kinds of transactions. So the financial transaction tax will actually reduce risk in the economy and risk to the system to try to avoid another crash. By the way, I'm really scared. Another much bigger one that can't be stopped.
I have a Mayday. You're asking for a Mayday alert? Hey, Track, we got a nuclear fire.
The officer, Captain Herbie Johnson, had his people up there, and fire got really nasty really quick, and there was a flashover, and Herbie and one of his people were caught on the second floor, and Herbie suffered some pretty bad injuries, and he didn't make it, so. Shortly after that, we got a visit on my shift from the mayor, and Mayor Emanuel came in. So he offered his condolences, and he also said that he had just come from speaking to Herbie Johnson's family again, and to see how they were doing, to check in on them, see if they needed anything. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe it was a mayor's thing to do. For him to come to us and do that, I thought it was a really classy gesture. Then he goes with that same demeanor and says, now I want to talk about your pensions. So right away, the alarm bells are going off in my head, because he used to come around, he was coming around to the firehouses before he got elected, when he was campaigning, talking about the same issue. And what he would tell us is, there's no easy choices. Your pension is badly underfunded. If you guys want to have something going forward, we're going to have to make some tough choices to make sure that you do.
We don't take care of the inherited past, be honest with our employees, be honest with our taxpayers, we're going to be stealing from our future, and that's just the wrong course to do.
So, I don't know what possessed me. I guess I'm sometimes a troublemaker once in a while. So I sort of raised my hand and I said, you know, I've got an idea. While our pension fund has been suffering and people have been losing their homes, we know there's one sector of our economy that's doing pretty well because we bailed them out. It's the banks, it's the investors. If we were to institute a tiny financial transaction tax on the Board of Trade and the Mercantile Exchange, we could recoup some of these losses, and we'll be getting it back from the people who squandered it in the first place. They won't notice it's missing. It could just be a tiny tax, and you could just bring in tremendous amounts of revenue and solve some of these budget crises. And he said, I don't support that. If you go down to Springfield, our state capital, you won't find any legislators who support that. If you think it's a good idea, you should run for office. The important thing, I think, with the financial transaction tax to me, is it's not just practical, it's also symbolic. It's saying, look, we are not going to let you, investors, bankers, do whatever you want and cause all this damage to all these people who you see as, I know, beneath you or not as important. If there's some value in what you do, you'll do it with a smaller profit margin. You'll do it and pay more taxes. And if there's no value in what you do, you know what, we're going to make it illegal. But until we figure that out, you're going to pay whatever we decide you're going to pay to help recoup some of this loss that you've created, to help repair some of this damage that you've caused. But I think but we have to change our thinking, though, as a society in general. You want to put another coat of paint on the bond trader's boat? Or do you want to make sure your firefighter has a pension to go to when he retires? Take your pick. It's an easy choice as far as I'm concerned.
The financial transactions tax, at a time when we're struggling to get our economies growing, is quite simply madness. That is why Britain has been arguing for a pro-business agenda in Europe.
The Griffin, it's present as a symbol of the city at the gates of the city, so you can see it all around the square mile. But it's more than simply a symbol. It seems to, in my mind, express something of the spirit of the city. And I experience that spirit as demonic, because it's the only way that I can understand how this system works. Because individually, the people in the city are good people. They're not bad people. May this incense be burnt in the name of the one whom it honours. Amen. But there is within this system something at work that causes us to exploit the world's resources, that is causing us to act against our own interests.
Now, of course, it is right that the financial sector should pay their share. But if you look at the European Commission's own original analysis, that showed that a financial transactions tax could cost the GDP of the European Union and could reduce it by 200 billion euros. It could cost almost 500,000 jobs.
I could imagine that if it produces somewhat less financial activity, there might be, at the end of the day, somewhat less people employed in the financial services industry across the world. But I'm a sufficient believer in the dynamism of capitalism that they'd find other jobs to do. And I actually think that we are overproducing financial services, and we'd probably find better jobs for them to do.
I mean, again, it comes back to the French attitude. If you charge people 75% rate of income tax, aren't we going to have a lot more money? No, because people will stop paying it because they'll either move away from it or they devise ways of avoiding it. And of course, it is only in the West, so most of the trade will move to Asia with no intention, I can tell you, of putting on any form of transaction tax.
There's a couple of problems with that. One, South Korea has a financial transaction tax. Taiwan has a financial transaction tax. Singapore has a financial transaction tax, as do several of the smaller markets.
Those who are against it, who just don't like it, what they do is they try to persuade enough countries to be against it that they can then say, oh, well, there's no point in the rest having it, because it will move to those against it.
The City of London guards its freedom to do exactly as it wants jealously. It's not going to sign up to anything that's going to impose a tax, however small, on the vast volume of money that passes through the city every day. It's not so much because they would lose huge amounts of money. There's so much money in the system, I doubt they would even notice it. I think their resistance is more because it smacks of the beginning of the possibility of a global tax regime.
We're celebrating the spirit of the Occupy movement, and the nurses globally from 16 countries are bringing the same message to their governments that we want to end austerity measures and pass the Robin Hood tax.
Banks got bailed out. We got sold out. Banks got bailed out. We got sold out.
People used to, in their positions, use that money to invest in our country, to invest in people, and they're not doing it anymore. We saw that with the banks. They're just hoarding it. And as a nurse, I would say they're probably a little bit mentally ill. It's not normal to want to hoard all that money. It's more than you could use in a lifetime. And the people in this country need it. They're on a planet with other people, they're in a country with other people, and that money needs to be put to good use. We pay sales tax on everything we buy. We're used to doing that. And if we have to pay sales tax on food and items of clothing and the things that we use every day, they should be paying a sales tax too, and that's what we're asking.
And this is revenue that would come in each year from the private sector into the public sector. And the impact that it actually will have on our economy is enormous. So that's one of the reasons why people like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, George Soros, all of whom are certainly no, left-wing liberal, have all supported the Robin Hood tax.
I grew up in the segregated South of the 1950s, and I saw the kinds of inequality there, and that angered me. And now when I look at what's happened, not just in the U.S., but in a lot of wealthy countries over particularly the last 30 to 35 years, and see the huge shift of income upwards to mostly 1% of the population, in which, by the way, financial employees are overrepresented in that 1% very significantly. When I see that, I think that level of inequality is not justified, but it also doesn't build the economy over the long run for the rest of us. And so this is a tax that, as we like to say in the Robin Hood tax movement, is not a tax on the people, it's a tax for the people.
There's not a problem with coming up with technical solutions to these problems that we've identified. It's a political problem. It's an organizing problem. It's a problem that the major parties have been captured by this global haven industry and the multinational companies that it represents, and the wealthy individuals that it represents. And left to their own devices, those parties will not step forward and advocate these kinds of reforms. We need to put pressure on them.
La question des paradis fiscaux est aussi importante du point de vue politique que ne l'est la question des variations climatiques du point de vue des écosystèmes. C'est un combat à long terme. Peut-être que de notre vivant, on n'en verra pas la fin. Mais il reste que, d'ores et déjà, les peuples doivent, je pense, réapprendre à se donner des institutions qui leur ressemblent. Des institutions qui leur ressemblent et qui sont la médiatisation de leur volonté en tant que corps public.
So arguably, although the foundations of the fiscal state have certainly been eroded by offshore finance, the fact that we now know about it means that perhaps we have the possibility of a greater democratic handle on it. This is something that now affects individuals. Until 2008, perhaps we didn't see it so clearly. What the bankers do has direct consequences for every individual, and we can now see that.
The reason, in fact, that the tax justice network and the tax justice movement in general are growing as a worldwide phenomenon is precisely because this experiment we ran with liberalization of markets didn't work. We don't have a welfare state anymore. We've had 30 years of dismantling it.